Hello, ladies and gentlemen of On the Line. Today with me, I have Phoebe Maltz Bovy, who has just finished her book, The Last Straight Woman. We are talking about the discourse, the absolute state of heterosexuality nowadays, and how and why it became embarrassing to be straight, and particularly a straight woman. How did this happen? Where is it going? What are we to do about the eternal problem of the sexes? That's today on the Line. Well, with me today, we have Phoebe Maltz Bovy. Phoebe, thanks so much for joining me on the Line.
Thank you so much, Jen.
Well, so I'm going to start this conversation by observing something that may shock some of our viewers and definitely some of our listeners. But I can't help but observe that you and I are both women.
Correct.
Correct, yes. And also, we both seem to ascribe to the same general identity known as straight women, which I'm told is very embarrassing nowadays. I was hoping that you might be able to explain to me why my sexuality became embarrassing, seeing as you seem to have written a book about this very subject matter.
Yes. So, to be clear, I do not think it is embarrassing to be a straight woman. I have, however, observed that there is a widespread, depending your circles, view that there is something embarrassing about being a straight woman, that it isn't simply a matter of being a woman who's attracted to men, but rather that it means that you're conventional, not all that sexual, kind of a follower, just doing what you're supposed to do in life, that you don't have the audacity to identify otherwise, that you just sort of that you're boring and conservative in a negative sense. And I think that's where that squirming comes from. And also just that you're maybe a little bit too okay with the patriarchy, and that as if this were not about wiring and who you do or don't want to sleep with or have intimate relationships with, but that's something more about your personality and your outlook politically.
And how has this happened, or how has this kind of this shift in the discourse corresponded with the rise and normalization of non-straight identity, queerness, transness, gayness?
Sure,
Is it a
absolutely.
reaction to that, or is it like what?
Yeah. So there are two things that have happened that are seemingly, they can look similar, but are not really the same thing. So one and is something that I think is a great thing, is greater acceptance of identities other than straight. I don't think there's been linear progress. You look at how things are going in the States, it certainly, which is where I'm from, it does not seem like linear progress at all. But yes, the thing that Adrienne Rich, the feminist poet and activist, called compulsory heterosexuality, which meant not just that women would have to be straight, but that women would have to be straight and married to, an appropriate man and so forth. That has receded. It's no longer as expected that women be straight at all, or indeed, if they are straight, get married, right? So that's what could just be the shorthand for that would be progress. There's also something else where somehow like everything became about gender and identity, such that the only way you could express your individuality as a woman was to kind of say that you're not like the other women. You're not, so square.
The not like other girls trope.
The not
right.
like other girls thing.
Right.
And I think where you see that is sometimes in a reluctance among people who are, functionally straight women to identify as such. Now, this gets complicated, and this is where people sometimes get mad, but it's not that I don't think it's possible to be like a bisexual woman in a relationship with a man. There are plenty such cases. That's not fake. It's that I think there's, you do get some cases where a woman will say that she's something other than straight, and when you sort of try to figure out what she means, it's what she's kind of saying is more like, I would be okay with it if I weren't straight, which it's like, great. That's a great political stance to have. That's not really telling me anything about your sexual orientation. What I think a more productive feminist tack to take would be to say, like, no, I'm a woman. I like men. I want the relationships I have with men to be more equitable or whatever. I think that's more productive than trying to sort of squirm at saying who you just are.
Is there something problematic about women being with men in a conventional marriage or a conventional relationship?
I think there's something problematic, and it's not really a word I would much use.
I know
But
I'm playing
yeah, I know what
devil's
you mean.
advocate
Yeah,
here.
yeah,
I'm
of
saying
course.
like,
Sure,
well,
sure, no.
I'm gonna play the hardcore
Yeah,
all you women who are with men are traitors shtick just for funsies.
sure.
Um,
No, I got it. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a problem with people coming into relationships assuming that they have to take on the stereotypical roles of their gender. So I think if you assume that when two people meet, if there's a really, really professionally ambitious woman and a kind of slacker homebody man, that because she's the woman, she should stay home and do more of the childcare and more of the housework, and he should go out to work because he's the man. That seems bad for everybody. I don't think that
Mm-hmm.
that plays to people's strengths. I think it's an unhappy setup. I don't think that there's a problem if in some other couples the woman is more inclined in a stereotypical wife manner and that's what she likes to do. Obviously, there's yeah.
I just like sourdough, man. It's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I think people, we all have the societal pressures and so forth, but like I think where I see the kind of feminist goal being is in people lead the lives best for them, not, just sort of following unthinkingly what their gender says they ought to be doing.
So let's talk a little bit about the rise of this discourse. And I want to talk a little bit about whether or not the discourse is actually reflected in reality, because I think oftentimes the conversation we're having online is not the reality of the lives we're really living. So I think this may be one of those cases here. But let's talk about like what's happened in the discourse that's risen to this idea that like it's not really considered kosher or cool to identify as a straight woman. It's far, especially in certain liberal circles, it's far more normalized now for ostensibly straight women to say that they're bisexual or queer or they're open to being not straight, even if they are living conventionally straight lives.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a piece of it, but there is also, and I think this is where, again, to talk about the difference between discourse and reality, there are far more bisexually identified young women than there used to be.
And there's data for that.
Yes, there's data for that.
Okay.
What has been more discourse than reality is the idea that there's this huge proliferation of seemingly straight women who now identify as non-binary. That is like 3 people. That is not a
Right.
huge number of people.
Right.
So, or for that matter, that there's some sort of tremendous numbers. There are not very many like trans gay men. It's an interesting phenomenon. There are some. There are very few. That is not very many people. There are far more. Where this came about, I mean, I think it's just MeToo is really the origin of this latest wave of it. This idea that anytime a man and a woman get together, there's this inherent power imbalance, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how do you avoid that? Well, you could say, okay, you shouldn't be dating your employees, you shouldn't be dating your students, all of these things. But then you get to a certain point, and if men are the ones in charge, should you really be having these relationships at all?
Right. Well, that sort of strikes me as a little suicidal in the long run.
Well, it's not me advocating for this, to be clear, but
No,
yes.
no. So here's where I think is kind of interesting. So I look at my husband. I am in a very ordinary, fairly traditional heterosexual marriage. I mean, I work, but sort of I do this. So no, I work. We have got 2 kids. I think we're pretty happily married, but we're like 7 years apart, and 7 years is a significant, albeit not an extreme age difference. And when we started to go dating, I think I was like 27 and he was 30. No, I was 28 and he was 35. And, now I'm 41 and he's 47, 48. And I would say like the power dynamics in our relationship when we started dating are very different than the power dynamics that we have now in the relationship. And that was something I didn't understand at 28, 29 getting into the relationship, that the relationship between us and the power between us would change and shift as I, went through my 30s. And I kind of grew up and matured at a much faster rate than he did as someone who was 35 going on 47 in the process of our relationship. So like there's something to be said for power dynamics in a relationship. And because men and women tend to have gaps where the men tends to be older and the women tend to be younger, that is going to be something that I think most normal heterosexual couples have to navigate over time.
Yeah, well, just I would say the average gap is something like between 2 and 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
So the
I'm not normal.
I'm not normal either.
In so many ways.
Yeah. I have an older husband. He's 6 days older than I am. If it were the other order, I mean, it would be extremely,
horrific,
edgy, but
yeah.
But he is still older, so it's okay. But yeah, I mean, I think what happened in terms of this whole thing with power imbalances, as is the case in so many arenas, is overcorrection. I think there had been in the 90s, earlier 2000s, this kind of gender neutral sex positivity, this idea that people are just people, like that it was conservatives who would criticize hookup culture on college campuses.
Sure.
If you were progressive, if you were sort of a right thinking liberal, you were like, no, people are just people, consenting adults, it's all fine. And you seemed stodgy and slut shaming, sex negative, if you weren't on board with that. Then people noticed, I would consider myself among the people who noticed, that men and women do not arrive at relationships, at equal footing. And that these, like a situation where a man says, oh, I'd like to have, 5 girlfriends, but you're not allowed to have other partners. This sort of thing happens, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you can't just say, oh, well, that's ethical non-monogamy. It's fine. Sometimes, yes, but sometimes CADs exist,
Yeah.
And I think there was this kind of widespread left and right understanding all of a sudden during, just before, and just after MeToo that no, it's not actually the same. It does matter that men and women are different. But then this became an overcorrection where there became this idea that, like, if there's any distinction in power, whatever, that it's basically the same as abuse. And I don't subscribe to that at all. I think that's just like people are happy from being in relationships with people they are attracted to. For virtually all women, that's going to be men. And that needs to be the starting point. And that sort of stopped being the starting point.
Okay, but again, playing devil's advocate against myself, because a 7-year age difference, I'm using myself as an example there, at 28 and 35 is one thing. But a 7-year age difference, if my husband and I met when I was 20 and he was 27 even, I think that would have been a bigger gap. Likewise, I sort of look at couples that are, right now the discourse is full of Olivia Newsy and things like that, and where the power lies in that. But when I see people, men, especially men who have professional positions of power in their respective fields, and they're dating, their 50s and even their 60s, and they're dating girls who are or women, I should say, even in their early 20s, like, sure, that's legal. Like, no one's going to put you in jail for that. But I am going to judge you because I don't think that that's necessarily ethical. But I don't know how to have that kind of discourse in a strictly progressive framework. I mean, if everyone's a consenting adult, then what's the problem? I don't know how to necessarily have that discourse in a conservative framework either, because I think a lot of conservatives would say, well, just so long as he marries her, that there's no problem with that, right? And I'm like, no, I think there's a problem with that even if he marries her. Like, I think that there is a conversation around power there that needs to be had or needs to be negotiated. And I think that those sorts of relationships kind of should be stigmatized. I don't think it should be a total free-for-all there.
I was going to say, I think what's been lost is the idea that you could just kind of criticize something without having necessarily a profound ethical objection to it or thinking there needs to be a law against it. Because I think
that's right.
There used to be, you would look at something like the Olivia Newsy and Ryan Lizza and story, and this was the stuff of gossip, and gossip would serve a certain type of function where here are powerful people who most of us don't know personally, I don't know them personally, who are behaving in ways that the ordinary folk can sort of look at and draw morals from, right? And the idea was not to, imprison any of these people. It wasn't to say, like, this is the most horrible thing happening on the planet. It was like to judge. You used to be able to
Yeah.
just kind of judge. And I think what's happened now is that function of gossip is gone, where it's either like you have to find a villain or there's this kind of don't judge, it's fine. And I think there was this gray area that, yeah, kind of got lost there.
Yeah, it's interesting. The Newsy case. Now, for people who aren't familiar with the Newsy case, I would just generally sum it up. Olivia Newsy was a well-known American journalist who's now written a book about her affair with Robert F. Kennedy, who is now working with the Trump administration, and then her ex, I think. I don't know if he was a fiance. It was fiance, right? Just did this incredibly overwrought series of blog posts about how she also had an affair with Mark Sanford. So like she's really running through the gamut of crazy old, Republican and other men who are active and ambitious in American public life.
She has a type.
She has a type. The type is crazy old. And I think there's an interesting conversation there about where does the power dynamic in that scenario lie? Because you have a much younger woman who's very beautiful, who clearly does have some power in her own right. Is she the one who's actually engaging in predatory behavior by taking advantage of these older men who are clearly seeking attention? Or are these older men taking advantage of this younger woman who's trying to be ambitious? They're all professionally established, more so than she was. It's an interesting thing, and I would say it's a conversation. But what I think we've lacked is the framework of stigma and shame. Like, you're right. I don't want these people arrested. They didn't do anything illegal, but do they deserve to be judged negatively for their behavior?
I would zoom out more. I would zoom out even more and say that I think something happened that I don't love in the culture with Me Too. Not all of Me Too is a lot of different things, right? But one aspect of it has been these kind of interminable news cycles about I don't think the Newsy case is quite a good example of it because it's so ambiguous, but all of these news cycles, creepy, powerful old man, beautiful young woman violated by creepy older man.
Yeah.
And these have served this kind of weird function where for feminist readers, it's empowering. For mainstream readers, for many male readers, it's titillating. These are stories that are sexy for a male gaze, for a straight male gaze. And there's no getting around that that's part of why, of all the feminist causes that might have been picked up, the one that could be illustrated in that way did. And what I'm hoping to do with my writing about straight women is just talk a little less about the like hot young woman with the powerful old men, and remember that first of all, most older men are not powerful and don't have young women available to them, beautiful or otherwise.
Yeah.
And most women are not young and beautiful. And most straight women are not young and beautiful. So I have been following this story too. I do not judge you for following. I have been following it. I've been podcasting about whatever. But like, when I think of straight womanhood... It's
really about ethics and journalism, man.
Exactly, yes. No, but when I think about straight womanhood, Olivia Newsy she seems like, it baffles me as a straight woman because I look at her lineup, I'm like, wouldn't, and some more wouldn'ts, but yeah, anyway.
It's an interesting one. So look, let's talk a little more about why this has happened in the discourse, not necessarily in reality, but why do you think this has happened in the discourse? Why do you think there are so many, especially liberal and progressive women, who claim a kind of more queer or more binary or more bisexual identity than they're willing to live?
I think people don't want to seem bigoted, and that was really, or at least didn't, I should say. I feel like so one strange thing with writing nonfiction is that you're writing during one moment and then vibes shift, right? So as I was writing, this has changed a bit since, there was this real preoccupation with not seeming like you were some sort of bigot, lest you be called out, by the mob for being some kind of bigot, right? And there would be cases where somebody, like one example I'm thinking of that I think I write about is like where some author had written fiction about a gay teenage boy, and was called out for, like, she's some straight lady. Where does she get off doing that? And then she did some whole very serious coming out post where she says that yes, she's married to a man, only ever been with men, but she's bisexual, let it be known. And her evidence, and not that people need to provide evidence, but whatever, but the reason she spells out is that, like, she's had close friendships with women or something. And it was like, okay, she's bisexual if she says she's bisexual, but it just seems like that's a very concrete case where somebody really did not want to be seen as a bigot, and that's kind of a way that you could put yourself under an umbrella of a category where it's unlikely you would be called that specific type of bigot. And I think there was this moment where, there was a lot of wanting to identify with a more marginalized group perhaps than one was a part of. I think that has changed. I don't think it's quite still like that.
Mm-hmm. I also want to talk about the rise of the trad wife. Where does the rise of the trad wife come into all of this? Because there's been a lot of conversation among, I think, liberal and progressive women about how the rise of figures like Ballerina Farm or other types of TikTokers who are engaged in kind of lionizing or romanticizing this lifestyle in which they stay home and bake bread and do everything from scratch and usually in designer dresses. There's been the rise of the popularity of that kind of content. And there's a lot of backlash to that content among progressive and liberal women, is just saying, like, look, this is basically propaganda for a movement that wants to put women back in the house or making women into housewives again. Whereas the other way of looking at it is being like the rise of the trad wife is itself the counter reaction to the denormalization of women staying home and taking care of their kids and engaging in a more stereotypically feminine lifestyle. So, like, where do you land on that? And, like, have you done any work or consideration on the trad wife discourse?
Yes, a lot to say on that. So, yes, counter reaction, I think, is getting at what's happening here, because you'll see these posts, not so much on Blue Sky, more on Twitter, of like, look at me, I have, like, some man will post like, I have a wife and children, take that, liberals, and I'm thinking, like, most of the people I know in Toronto are like pretty left-wing, living in, man, woman, children, households, whatever. But yeah, this idea that just simply to lead a fairly ordinary heterosexual life is already, like, sticking it to the libs, right?
It seems to me like there is almost this sense that living a unabashed, very ordinary family type lifestyle where you have a wife, have a kid, maybe even you have some chickens in the backyard, like, there's something almost countercultural about that now.
Yeah, so that's what some will claim. It can seem a little silly, like, even to me, as somebody who is as up on this discourse as anybody. I will sometimes see that and think, okay, like, you're not actually owning the libs by having an ordinary life. But so that's one piece. Trad wives specifically is complicated. Some of it is basically like quasi pornographic content for men, where it's like a woman with, tremendous cleavage, and she's submitting to a man, and it's like, well, what kind of submitting are we talking about here? And, like, is it a sex thing or not? It's ambiguous, and maybe in some cases not ambiguous, because I think there's some crossover. So that's one aspect of it. Then there's this just kind of general societal, it sucks to have to work, like, a lot. I think there's an escapist appeal for some women of this idea that you could just, like, change how you arrange society and suddenly you can just be, like, home baking and not have to do anything else. What's interesting to me is where there's pushback from more traditionalist women who are like, no, actually, to do farm work is labor. You wouldn't look like that. Your nails wouldn't be like that, whatever, So yeah. There
are a lot of Mennonite and Amish women out there who could school you on what tradwifing actually is, and it ain't easy.
Yeah, I mean, I looked into this a little, like, because for the Canadian Jewish News where I worked, I at one point was, I think for a podcast, they're looking at, like, are there Jewish trad wives? And you don't seem to get that quite so much. There are many, like, Orthodox Jewish women who live in a traditional manner. But the trad wife seems to be very associated with a kind of like nativist strain, certainly in the States. So it's its own thing. It's not a type of content I ever find myself that interested in, though, like to peruse. So I know that this ballerina farm gets a lot of people very angsty, that a lot of women sort of like hate follow her, and I just don't find it that interesting. It's like I don't wish I had, like, I have 2 children, that's plenty. I don't wish I had like 12 more and lived somewhere remote. I'm okay in Toronto, it's fine.
It also seems very interesting to me that as we get into more and more polarized and polarizing content, what we're losing from the discourse is lifestyles that are actually radically more normal. I think that probably the way you live and probably the way I live is almost certainly way more common and a much more relatable experience to most women and men, and that is, married at a reasonable age, reasonable number of children, do try to maintain it. Women in the family do try to maintain a career and may even be the breadwinners, but if not, then at least trying to maintain a separate career or continuation of the career. Both parents are more or less trying to pitch in to try and keep the household afloat, trying to keep the kids, occupied and going to school, all the rest. And I think that it's become much more normal for a much more equitable kind of balance of relationships in my generation than certainly even in my mom's generation. And the result of that is twofold. One is, more women are bringing money into the workforce, so you can't really afford to have the women drop out when kids come along. And that's even true with the high cost of daycare and childcare. And then the other thing too, so that changes the power dynamic in any relationship when both partners are bringing in money. And I think the other thing that's fundamentally changed about all of this is just it's a much more normal kind of equitable. Oh, and the other thing I was going to say is, I think a lot of young couples and even middle-aged couples don't have the kind of extended family support that they used to have. Right, the nuclear family has been enshrined just in the way that we build our houses. And as a result, if you're actually trying to manage a nuclear family without extended help and both parents are working, there's this fantasy that one of you is going to be doing all the work and one of you is going to be doing all the housework. That breakdown just doesn't work anymore. It doesn't function anymore. So what tends to happen is, housework probably goes to hell, sure. But what tends to happen is that, men have to pitch in to do more of the housework. They have to pitch in to do more of the childcare, and women are having to pitch in to do more of the paid care as well.
Yeah. Oh, I have so many thoughts on this.
Yeah, like that. I think that's just way more normal, right? And are the divides still a little bit stereotypical? I mean, sure, but I think that is it. But that you can't turn that into a TikTok. That's not content that goes viral or sells. But I think that's probably the vast majority of straight couples nowadays are living something much closer to a kind of equitable or balanced or at the very least fair relationship breakdown, at least as far as I can see.
So anecdotally, in Canada, at least, and I should say by Canada, I mean like my block in Toronto, I don't have a national survey, but like anecdotally, it seems more the case in Canada than in the States. I think there is more of a kind of traditional gender role thing going on in the States than what I observe around me. I would say, like, I find a lot of the content about the woman who's forced to do everything hard to relate to because, yeah, my husband and I, neither of us are from Canada originally. We don't have, like, family around helping out. We are both always working. We are both always folding laundry, both of us. And I do find that the sort of discourse about invisible labor and so forth means that when I'm doing one of these tasks, I sometimes do just like feel almost like socialized into resenting that I'm doing it. And then I look over, my husband's doing another similar task. And I think, okay, this is like, I'm mad about some situation I read about. I'm not actually mad about anything happening in my own life.
Right.
And the other aspect of this I wanted to mention, though, is that this whole somewhat performative, like, let's get rid of the men, lets men off the hook. It's saying, okay, we're going to form this commune, get rid of all those good for nothing men. Okay, so then that is only women, dealing with the
childcare, house
childcare and
care,
house care and all of
bringing
that.
in
And
money.
yeah, and
And let me,
I think a more feminist approach involves, men doing some of this. And this is something I wrote about for the Globe and Mail recently, where it was both not just political lesbianism, but also that there was some woman who wrote for a women's magazine, I think it was Harper's Bazaar, saying that she has an AI boyfriend and how much better that is because, like, he just tells her kind things or whatever. And I'm thinking, like, okay, but is this AI boyfriend going to, like, load the dishwasher? You
yeah.
know? I mean, maybe, but I'm going to guess not.
Well, and also, okay, this is where we're going to get really controversial. The normalization and romanticization of single motherhood. So I was raised by a single mom, and let me tell you, that is not the lifestyle that she wanted for me. And the reason why that isn't is because it means you do twice the work with half the wage. And, statistically speaking, there's a reason why kids coming out of single parent households struggle. They don't have the same advantages as kids coming out of, at a minimum, two-parent households. And I even would argue that two-parent households themselves are probably too small. We probably need to be going back to like two-parent plus extended family households. So, but I do feel like the discourse really romanticizes the idea of single motherhood as like this is some kind of ideal scenario. And I got to be honest with you, I just look at that lifestyle and I say, yeah, you're not dealing with the compromises that you would have to have by having a partner. But my God, the amount of work and burden that you are taking on as a single woman to take care of kids. I just don't think that that's a sustainable answer. And I don't think that leads to better outcomes for women or kids. And in fact, there's a reason why single moms are overwhelmingly poorer than male counterparts, and they're overwhelmingly poorer than I think women in married relationships. And this is why it's an impossible task to raise a child alone. And that's true whether or not you're a woman or a man. I think it might be an impossible task to raise a child even if you have two parents, right? Like
some days it feels like that. I mean, I think
yeah.
this is another case of overcorrection, right? I think there was a lot of stigmatization and, to return to that term again, slut shaming and all of this of single mothers in the past that went beyond like just the sort of practical situation of being of just not having as much money, not having as much time. I think it was correct to do the destigmatizing, as in like you should not feel bad about yourself if you
Oh God, no.
wound up in that situation. And
Yeah.
obviously there are specific cases that I'm sure we both know of, women who are single mothers by choice, and they have a lot of friends, they have a great support network, they're making it work, they're doing great. I think then there has been this whole sort of the don't judge era. I don't know if we're still in the don't judge era. Maybe we are in Canada.
Honestly, I don't want to
don't
judge or stigmatize women who are in that scenario.
Right.
Like I said, my own mom was
Yeah.
in that scenario, right? And I've got
Yeah.
nothing but respect for the work that she put in to raise me and make her life a success, and she did. It's not about a stigmatization, but I do think that there's a problem with romanticization. To think that's an equal, all options are equally good, and that's an equally good one. It's not an equally good option. If it is infinitely superior that you be well supported with a large, committed network of family members if you're raising kids than it is to try and raise a kid alone.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're describing as romanticization, I think I would call overcorrection, right? Like,
Sure.
I think that's probably where it came from.
Right. And I don't know if so are you familiar with Paris Paloma, the singer who did Labor? She's done a couple of really
No.
interesting songs. Maybe we'll try and drop a clip if we can get the rights to it. But she's a really popular singer, and I loved listening to her songs until I paid attention to the lyrics, because her songs just slap. Like they're really edgy, they're really cool, they're really feminist. And then you go and listen to the lyrics, or you go into YouTube and you watch the music videos, and it's constructing this fantasy. All of her videos kind of do the same thing, and that is they put her in some kind of highly romantic medieval style garb, right? And then they have her in these music videos slaving away for the benefit of this evil man who wants nothing from her. And the song is called Labor. Like, you make me do too much labor is the big hit, right?
because of course she all day, every day, nurse, mother, something maid, like I'm everything to you. And in this music video is this man who's just eating all this food that she provides for him and is selfishly absorbing everything about her. And that really bothered me for two reasons. One, I was like, that's not the reality of any actual relationship I've seen. There is no healthy relationship that isn't overtly abusive, where the man isn't a part of the relationship. You're in a relationship that is a two-poled thing. I'm not saying that there aren't abusive relationships. There are abusive relationships. And we know through history, women couldn't escape abusive relationships. But to try and present that as being the norm is engaging in some kind of like oppression cosplay that isn't really applicable to modern women today in most parts of certainly Canada and the United States, unless you are literally trapped into a domestic violence situation. And the other part of me is that I'm just going like, even in the scenarios that she's presenting, if you were a wealthy woman with a wealthy man, it wouldn't be you doing the labor, it would be your servants. You're not engaging with the reality that women themselves were often historically the exploiters in wealthy kinds of dynamics, right? So you wealthy woman born in 2002 don't really get to claim the exploitation that your sisters from 400 years ago who were living in a peasant countryside were subjected to. And that's where I think for me the discourse kind of loses saliency. Like, we're still operating as if we're an oppressed class from 500 years ago, and we're not. The realities of the gender dynamics and the gender realities we have to face today are just fundamentally different. It doesn't mean that there's not, how should I say this, aspects of the patriarchy that I would like to fix or whatever, or that everything's perfectly equal and hunky-dory right now. But I don't think that it's serving us to pretend that we're still oppressed peasants at the whims and fantasies of some feudal lord, right? Like that's not the reality that we're dealing with today. And I don't know, something about those songs really kind of irks me for that reason, even though I really like them.
I'll have to hear them. Yeah, I'm thinking of, well, a few different things. One is, so I think, to push back a little, I think in the States, with the reversal of Roe v. Wade, with this kind of general economic, like the tariffs and all of this, there's the whole Canadian angle on it, but there's also the gender angle on it, and this, I think, attempt of the Trump administration to return to more of a manufacturing economy, to have it, and this, cracking down on higher ed does seem like, if you zoom out, this is a women back in the home movement.
There is absolutely a faction within the Trump administration that is regressive and Christian nationalist that does want to see women return to more traditional roles.
Right. So whether they succeed, how big of a faction that is, I don't know. But I think the successes of feminism are relatively recent and can feel maybe like a little more tenuous than one might think, So
Sure.
I think that the American in me has to see it like that. I also wonder, with just in general with art, what frustrates me, I don't know these particular songs, but I'm thinking about the short story from the New Yorker, Cat Person, about a young woman who gets in an unpleasant relationship with a man. And this came out sort of like prime MeToo, and was widely reported on as if it were like, well, first of all, as if it were a true story, as if it were a personal essay when it was fiction, but also just there was this sort of almost unanimous reception of, we've all been there. This is how it is for all women. And what I think I balk at generally is just any kind of insistence that there is a single experience, and this attempt at channeling how all women feel into whatever one woman feels. So maybe one woman, this singer, identifies with a medieval servant. A bit odd. That's one person. What would frustrate me more is if the criticism of it is all like, and we've all been there, right, ladies? You know what I mean? Because yeah, we haven't.
Yeah, you know nothing about the actual oppression that was that was ladled upon your grandmother's 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 grandmother, and you know the problems that you face, while they are not insignificant or while they're worth addressing and being honest about. You know, you don't need to go into oppression cosplay in order to have a thoughtful conversation about the challenges facing women in 2025, right? Like that would be kind of my take on it. You know, the issues facing me today are like, you know, am I going to get equality of opportunity in order to gain access to the same sorts of jobs and opportunities that my male peers are going to get in this white collar profession that I happen to be working in? They're not like, my husband's going to burn me at the stake, right? You know what I mean? Like that's
There are still real things like women getting fired for getting pregnant or for
it happens.
Like this is not far-fetched. This is a pretty everyday occurrence that, you know.
That's right. That's right.
And I think that sometimes where I become the sort of social justice warrior, you know, like you can see my hair turn purple as I speak. But kind of, yeah, is it basically like this, just because in law certain things now favor women in ways that they didn't before doesn't mean that all women are in positions to sue. You know what I mean?
That's
like
right.
A lot of horrible things still go on, and even women from, you know, on paper privileged backgrounds, whatever, are not always doing that, and men are getting away with a lot of awful stuff still without that always being, you know. And yeah, I mean,
Absolutely.
This gets back to like my sort of big frustration with Me Too, is that I think the sorts of men who are going to be really villainous still are, and that it was more just like it made nicer men walk on eggshells. I'm not sure it really had much of an impact on like Jeffrey Epstein type men.
Right. That's a good question. That's a good point. What was the actual material impact of Me Too? Did it actually lead to positive legislation, changes, cultural shifts that could make exploitation of men and women in the workplace less likely, or outside the workplace less likely? Or have we had the honest conversation about power dynamics, right? And sometimes those are hard conversations to have. Those are hard conversations to negotiate, right? And then I want to talk about discourse versus reality a little bit, because I think that there has been this real shift in the discourse away from heteronormativity, if you prefer, away from the reality of most women, which is that most, not all, but most women are straight. Most women, not all. Most women wind up partnered. Most women, not all, increasingly not all, have at least a kid. That is not the universal female experience, but it is certainly the typical female experience, right? And I think that doesn't mean that we should be shaming or stigmatizing people who veer from what's typical. The world's a big place, takes all types, right? It's all fine. But how much of our conversation is rooted in kind of an online discourse that we're really engaged with because we're both really online, versus the reality of how most women are living their lives? Because when I look around, I mean, I had this conversation with Christine Emba, who wrote a book a couple of years ago about just how toxic dating culture had become, right? How things like choking had been normalized, how Tinder had basically turned human dating into a commodification racket, right? And I said to her, and I was like, okay, but you're basing all of your examples of this on a handful of people you've talked to and interviewed, mostly in like the Washington, D.C. area, which is not the best place to be trying to find, you know, healthy, happy, long-term partners. And yet most of the people that I see in my life, you know, are pretty normal people who are, you know, they find partners, they get married, they form healthy relationships. Again, there are instances of abuse and domestic assault out there. That's also normal. But most people are in a pretty... Here's the thing that I think we almost don't even talk about anymore. We only ever see examples of unhappy marriages or unhappy pairings because those are the ones people talk about. But you know, a happy marriage is a happy marriage because no one talks about it, right? When you're in a happy marriage, you're not on TikTok, you're not in social media, you're not griping about your happy marriage where everything is working out more or less fine. You're not writing think pieces for the New Yorker about your happy marriage, right? Like the happy marriage is kind of, or at least happy enough marriage is kind of the standard. And the divorce marriages or the really nightmarish marriages are the ones that people talk about and write about. But because we don't really have a lot of discourse about what a normal happy marriage looks like or what it is, people tend to think that it's a lot rarer than I think it actually is.
Yes, so you bring up a lot of really interesting points, and I'll try to
I'm
address
talking to. I'm
them.
not even asking questions at this point. I'm just talking.
No, but I have so many thoughts about this, specifically like the reality versus discourse question is complicated. You would think from the discourse that during, like, right after the pandemic, all the straight women got divorced because there were all these divorce memoirs.
Mm-hmm.
I think there was probably some cultural interest in divorce at that time, but the divorce rate did not skyrocket. This is not something that happened in
Right.
the actual world of
Real
people.
world. Yeah.
So I would read these takes about, like, don't leave your nice husband to go find yourself, and I would think, who did this apart
Who
from
did
some
this?
woman in a book? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, it's not that, like, I've never known real life women to do this, but it's just there was no epidemic of women doing this such that there needed to be like a serious talking to for women. Like, don't do that. Like, I think women understand that if you're like in your 40s and you're like, my husband's nice enough, but what if I wanted to like date a men's lacrosse team instead? You know, like, yeah, I think people are more realistic than are maybe given credit to, whatever, about
Yeah.
what would actually provide happiness in life. And so that's one thing. In terms of it being this kind of rarefied existence to be very online, I think this was true when I was first writing about the online sphere. So, like, for my first book, I was writing about the like internet like blog comment sections in like the 2010s. And the book came out, The Perils of Privilege, came out in 2017, right? It was more of a, I don't know if rarefied is the word, it was more niche to be that online. With the pandemic, that really changed up to, and, you know, like, people meet their partners online. Mainstream politicians are extremely online, very memeified. All of this, like, people are very online. Normie people are connected to the internet. So
Sure.
it doesn't really, so it does. And I guess what I'm getting at where it relates to this is it does matter if there's this discourse that's really at a disconnect from reality. And this is why I'm advocating for this, using it as a starting point that most women want to be with men and have relationships with men. Because if you have a whole discourse about how much happier women would be to just get rid of men, and then you have a reality of women not being like that, it doesn't work. It just doesn't connect. It doesn't help anybody. It sounds very feminist, but it doesn't lead to anything particularly feminist because it's unrealizable. And if it were realized, it would just be the same as like saying all women should be nuns, you know? Because if you're a straight woman, what does it mean to say don't be with men?
Right. It doesn't actually give you an outlet for healthy sexuality. It doesn't give you an outlet for harmony and all the rest. Nunneries are starting to appeal to me as I get older, though. I mean, I'm starting to, a lot of quiet, a lot of silence, positive friendships, being around people. I'm just saying, I'm not ruling it out. I'm not ruling it out for myself. The other thing I think that is an interesting conversation here, I don't know if you want to talk about the idea of like we don't actually see a lot of models for healthy, happy marriages in our
oh sure, yeah, that too.
In our cultural norms, like even in you know sitcoms and ordinary television, all of the marriages that are portrayed are kind of one-sided or haphazard, or the men are presented as idiots or the women are presented as unhappy and blah 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 blah. And I just don't. I don't think that's actually, maybe I'm very lucky in my personal life, but I just don't think that's normal.
Yeah, so there is the thing where like drama, gossip, all of this, whether we're talking about sitcoms, whether you're talking about personal essays, it's always going to tilt towards unhappiness because of, you know, not to like botch a literary quote, but like they're more varied, the unhappy families. So in terms of happy TV marriages, one that comes to mind is the Petries, Rob and Laura Petrie on the Dick Van Dyke Show. So that's from the 1960s, not last week. Another that comes to mind is the Stewarts, Don and Jacqueline Stewart from Benidorm, who are this sort of late middle-aged, early elderly couple of swingers on Benidorm. They're these Scottish the Scottish couple. I think maybe she's English, and they just have this like extremely wild marriage, but they just look like these very staid British people. And
That sounds
they love each
hilarious.
other and they're just very, very happy.
Yeah.
So I do think you do see some happy marriages, but I think you then need to get the drama from some other source.
Yeah,
I
you
think
just need to
that,
get, yeah.
yeah.
Because
The
drama's
bigger
like,
problem, yeah, sorry.
happy marriages aren't dramatic. That's the problem.
No,
Right?
no, I mean, and it doesn't bother me that personal essays or fiction or whatever is about something other than like the placid happy marriage. I think
Sure.
that where the level at which it bothers me is the expectation that everybody identify with unhappiness, that you say, oh, I see that is point for point my own life, because like if it isn't, it forces you to find the unhappiness in your life that might not have been there to begin with.
Well, and it also creates this cultural expectation, like there's no point of being involved in a marriage because you're going to be miserable and divorced, and the people who don't get divorced are the ones who just suffer through misery. Like there is that assumption, right? And it undermines the moral underpinning or the emotional underpinning of marriage as an institution, and I don't think that's healthy.
No, I agree, and I think there's something tricky about the discourse that, and this goes beyond anything to do with straight women, but that anything that causes friction in your life should be gone. The kind of therapy speak idea of like,
Sure.
cut that toxic person out of your life, cut that stressor out of your life. And then what do you have? Well, you're home, you're ordering in, you're streaming shows, you're not interacting with any people.
You have a very sterile life.
Yeah, and
that's a very sterile life.
I think there's something like there should just be a normalization of compromise, and without that, you can't really distinguish between what's healthy compromise and what's being pushed around, you know?
Well, I know that, but this is the problem fundamentally with AI, quote unquote, relationships, which aren't relationships. They're frictionless, right?
Right.
But human relationships have friction to them. Also, I really hate
all sorts of friction, yeah.
That friction and that discomfort is how we grow and how we develop and how we become more resilient with time.
I was trying to make a slightly lewd comment, but yes, that's
we can leave it to people's imaginations.
Yes.
But yeah, if you're trying to create a frictionless life for yourself, then you're creating a position of total equilibration. You've created something very sterile and something in which you never have to grow or evolve or adapt. You can just stay in your happy little bubble and no one bothers you. Negative emotions aren't bad, they're just difficult. Right?
No, I mean, I think this is again that overcorrection, right? I think people in the past would put up with unhappy marriages, like really miserable ones, because they felt they had to, or they did have to. And some marriages were and are correct to end. The question is, if you're ever annoyed at another person, should you break all ties with them? Yeah, maybe not. But I would, again, take comfort in the fact that people are not actually doing that.
No, I don't think they're doing it. But I do think that there's something to be said about the catastrophization, for lack of a better term, of certain ordinary, unpleasant human experiences. When we say, again, therapy speak, cut that toxic person out of your life, what has become toxic to people has become a much wider range of things. Like there's one thing, somebody who's trying to, for example, induce you back into a catastrophic alcoholism or catastrophic addiction. Yes, cut that person out of your life. That is not ordinary friction. But someone who challenges you with really unpopular and even really bad political opinions, that's just friction. And I guess you get to decide for yourself if you want that person in your life. But that's not toxic necessarily. That person's not necessarily doing you harm just because they cause you discomfort. And if you were to cut all of those people who cause you discomfort out of your life, that's a pretty narrow, pretty small life pretty quickly.
Yeah. I mean, what I worry for the younger people, I'm 42, that they are just not forming these relationships to begin with. So it's not even about cutting the people out. It's just like not making these connections to start with. And because everybody's in all these silos online, they're just not even like forming those relationships with people they might disagree with to begin with.
Right. I also feel like being 41, 42, or the same age, basically, that is like the perfect time to really be alive, because it feels like you're between two currents. You're between like the horrible, how do I say this nicely? You're between kind of the boomers and the Gen Xers, which are kind of divorced from the online discourse to a greater degree, but also have their own political currents that they're riding. And you're also divorced from the pure nihilism of the coming generation, which is just horrific for me to see. I think it's more common for us to just have fairly normal relationships and fairly normal marriages, and everything in our life hasn't been completely consumed by online discourse. And we do recognize a time before online discourse in a way that the younger generations don't. So I'll give you a perfect example of this. So I didn't meet my husband online. I met my husband in real life and had to throw myself at him repeatedly to get him to notice me, very unsubtly. And it worked out well for the end. It was fine. But, I can't imagine trying to be on Tinder nowadays. And just
I met my husband in real life too. I can't, and this is really a problem when my book is about straight women. It's not about every single facet of straight womanhood because I am one person. And my real knowledge gap is the firsthand experience of the dating app because I met my husband when we were both 23.
Easy,
and there
yeah.
were not dating
You never
apps.
had to be on a dating app ever.
So I think a lot of the angst younger people have, and it's not just the dating apps, but it's this idea that it's more feminist to use dating apps than to meet in real life because it's supposed to be protecting women from getting hit on in public. And from what I hear, it seems like there is this new norm, although I'm not sure how much it's sticking, of like that it's just inherently problematic to hit on a woman in person, that you can only meet people through apps. Not just that many people will, but that like to talk to a woman in a coffee shop would be like so terrible and considered like doing some, like crossing some kind of line. And that, I hope for the sake of the youth that is not where things are going, but it seems like it was, at least for a while.
And again, my only experience about the experience of someone in their 20s nowadays is coming through online discourse because I'm a middle-aged grizzled woman now, and that's fine. But it seems like the life that they have and how they interact with people of the other sex and how they're going about dating just sounds like a goddamn nightmare to me. I read these stories or I read these experiences. And I'm just like, I'm just so glad that I married in the nick of time and never had to have the experience of like the swipe situation on Tinder, the commodification of myself and others in that way. It sounds awful. It doesn't sound romantic. It doesn't sound seductive. It doesn't sound sexy. It just sounds like ugly, unhappy non-relationships with people. Nothing about it seems human or humane to me. But again, is that the reality that young people are actually experiencing, or is that my perception of that reality because of what I'm reading? And I'm just like another old woman, going, yeah, kids these days, get off your phones.
I think like plenty of couples, including couples my own age, who've met, like, I'm 42. Not all 42-year-olds met their partner at 23, right? And plenty of people I know have met online and it's worked out great. I do wonder whether there's just going to be this kind of move away from that just because people are not happy with it by and large. And, like, obviously the young people in my own life, like I have young kids, so I see who are in elementary school. So it's like they hang out in person with a group of friends. They're not on the forums, you know what I mean?
Okay.
And maybe
they seem okay.
So maybe they can just kind of extend that as they get older and have more of a grass touching sort of existence. Maybe, like, my hope is that the nostalgia that is definitely a part of this moment heads more in that direction and not towards just kind of like rampant overt bigotry of all kinds.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't have high hopes, but some. Anyway, Phoebe, thanks so much for joining me today on The Line. You've been a great sport, and I had a great conversation with you, and hope to see you again soon in future iterations. And actually, when is your book coming out?
May 19th.
May 19th. All right, well, congratulations, and we'll read it when it comes out.
Thanks so much, Jen.